today, while the infamous Suez Canal, ever green, ever whatever, is heading north. The sneaky Omar, the other is heading south. Oil price is heading south. Omar Najia, Global Head of Derivatives at BB Energy. Your take on the markets this morning?
Well, market's been extremely volatile recently. If you look at a chart of WTI, you'll see like huge candles, push down, push up, push down, push up. And then you had a nice push up on Friday, and you have a nice push down today. So markets are doing, what they have been doing for a while, which is basically correcting. Trend is the long-term thing. So trend, I think, is clearly still up, whichever market you look at. And all of them are in the process of correcting, whether it be WTI, whether it be S&P, whether it be Bitcoin. The thing about corrections are they can get extremely complex. They're not like, moving in the direction of a trend, which is usually very impulsive and straight up you go and all that kind of stuff, or down. So I think right now markets are, whatever I look at, be it Bitcoin or equities or oil, they're in the process of correcting, consolidating, whichever way you want to look at it. After this process of consolidation, I think we move higher across all three. The question is when? Is it going to be a long-term thing? Are we talking weeks? Or are we towards the end of it and we go up in a matter of days?
Peter Mcguire, CEO of XM Australia. While oil prices are falling, Asian equity markets are rising.
Yes, good morning, Sean, and good morning, panel. Yeah, we've got a mixed bag across Asia very much today. We had the Aussie down, we had New Zealand up, and then everyone else in between. Some of the markets were down 1.5%, and others were up 1.5%. So it's been a very building on Friday's numbers, where everything was bid up strongly across equities. It's a little bit of a mixed bag today, Sean. Now, that US dollars continued to climb, building on what Omar mentioned, 92.83. So we're approaching that magic 93 number, that 93 handle. So that could be, materialized 93 and a bit by Easter. The Suez situation, my understanding is that the boat has been moved. I don't know how many meters it's been moved, but I don't believe it's been dislodged. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm not sure how long that takes to play out. That's the news that I'm receiving. So that creates, again, uncertainty leading into the Easter week, all of that with 300 odd ships behind it. I've seen some videos and it's just an incredible situation. So,
well, if you take that the canal can handle 50 vessels a day, and there's about 400 backed up, do the math on that. It's going to take a few weeks to clear this thing.
Absolutely. But is the ship being moved, Sean, that actually boats can get around it, or this ever given can actually be moved, or is it floating now? My understanding is it isn't floating.
The reporting is that it's in the process of being taken, is on floating, back to floating, will be resolved, will open up. The sort of heavy lifting, no pun intended, is done, and it's now about just ensuring the vessel is seaworthy and so forth. So it's still got another day or two in it, perhaps, till the canal opens up. But we're in the resolving end of this problem, and then you've got obviously the gridlock to clear.
Absolutely. Well, I understand that. So let's see what impact it has to supply lines. Any chance that you might see a little bit of a correction to the downside as far as equities rolling across that Eurozone and other markets that are being impacted by it? So I just think that volatility leading up into Easter will probably remain. We've seen big swings over the last week, up 6 and 7%, down 6 and 7, big bounces back up. So we're off today a couple of percent, Sean, around about nearly 2% for WTI. Let's see what happens over the next 13, 14 hours until New York shuts.
Or maybe even opens. Andrei Belyi, good morning, professor, founder, and CEO of Balesene. one of our favorite topics. The U.S. Secretary of State overnight actually sort of commenting rather casually on Nord Stream 2, indicating that, well, if the Europeans want to do it, they'll probably do it.
Well, objectively speaking, the chances of Nord Stream 2 being built are growing. Although we don't have exact indications of what is going on there in terms of constructions, and maybe the constructors are kind of overestimating the speed. However, the United States understand that they cannot do much. If the pipeline going to be stopped, it's going to be either because of Germans, for example, change of the government in Berlin, or because of Brussels, in case if the either European Commission or one of the member states decide to act legally against the German regulator to ban the pipeline in case of whatever threat they consider it to be. So I think in Washington there is an understanding that they cannot do much. And therefore this tone has changed. What is interesting by contrast is that the political tone in relations with Russia have accelerated actually, and there the tensions are growing, and that can be quite paradoxical or maybe unrelated, more unrelated than paradoxical, that US-Russia tensions seem to grow despite Nord Stream 2. And Nord Stream 2 will not impact on anything, neither it will impact on the development in eastern Ukraine. Tensions between pro-Russian forces there and Ukraine are growing, are mounting. And
it's important that the Americans don't go down the rabbit hole any further. If they're going to lose this sort of argument, they don't want to perhaps hand it on a plate to seen as a victory to Putin. So they should start backing away from this sort of ultimatum posture.
That will be a dilemma, because in case if, for example, Russia reinforces its positions in eastern Ukraine, whatever we can imagine, the United States will have to react. And after Biden's administration showed that it wants to talk on the language of force with Russia, and they don't have much of maneuver of negotiating. So they have to show tough stances, but do they have these cards in hand to show really the tough stances? So we are really moving towards an area of uncertainty, and I would say pretty tense developments might occur in the very near future.
Omar, this morning we have, I suppose, a rather significant day in terms of the launch of the ICE Futures Abu Dhabi Exchange and the Murban Futures contract, which started trading this morning, ADNOC's flagship crude. What are your thoughts on that? How could it, may it impact the market? What's your views on that?
I think they said that for the first couple of months, it's going to be like a futures thing. And then after that, it starts being physically deliverable. So I think basically, when it gets physically deliverable, that's going to be so right now they're ironing out all the kinks. And when it gets physically deliverable, we'll see if there's like a large volume, then certainly it get very interesting, depending on how large that volume is. Because the whole point about Murban is that you can buy and sell it and actually make or take physical delivery. So if that starts to happen, then you get what's called price discovery. So Murban will be priced according to what people think it's worth, as opposed to the worth of of Murban as as the worth of Brent minus or Brent plus or whatever it is that you use to replace it. Now you have the price of the underlying contract, so to speak.
What would you need to see in these early days in order for confidence to build? What would you be looking for that says, oh, this is going in the right direction?
Volume. So you need to see volume. Like I say, for the first couple of months, it'll just be, ironing out all the kinks. So people can trade it, buy a few lots, sell a few lots, make sure that everything's working. reporting is okay, clearing is okay, everything is working. And after that, and that should, volume doesn't really matter, but after that, you should get, cargo sizes trading, or multiple, hopefully, cargo sizes trading. Then you'll know that for the first time ever, crude in the Arab Gulf is being priced or being discovered in terms of price in the region, as opposed to being some kind of netback or some kind of using some other kind of proxy to determine its price. So it's quite significant if that volume takes off.
Peter, we have, as mentioned, the big OPEC meeting this week. The resolution of the blockage of the Suez Canal, I think, would probably be a headache out of their way and confusing the picture. How do you see the challenge OPEC faces in terms of its next decision? The consensus appears to be rollover. You're on mute, Peter. Sorry.
Pardon me. I do agree with you in the sense of rollover, but the uncertainty naturally, as we've discussed previously, is that Suez issue. If that continues and this isn't sorted within the next, say, 24 to 36, say 48 hours, then I think it's going to probably be a larger issue for OPEC to consider. That's the first part. The second part is price at the moment, Sean, at that $60 handle, 65 handle, I'm sure that OPEC are over the moon compared to where they were in November or October. We've got a couple of issues as far as COVID re-lockdowns. Manila's gone into something quite severe, 24 million people across that Philippine basin. And then you've got some in Australia and a couple of other, random hits. So that hasn't been. And in the US,
we're seeing infections rise again after a number of weeks of decline.
Exactly. So, taking all that on board, and we're moving into that Northern Hemisphere summer, you'd have to be very, very satisfied with also a strong US dollar at that 93 handle. I'm sure that OPEC are very, very satisfied as far as price. So, yes, roll over. And the great issue at the moment is, do we see any derailments as far as geopolitical or a risk premium built in from that Suez issue, or something unknown present itself to the market, Sean?
Dr. Andrei, one of the sort of building stories seems to be the return of shale, or shale producers lining up in order to be ready to sort of increase production. Well, obviously a number of months of the rig count in the US increasing. So my question ultimately is, should OPEC be taking the opportunity this week to shoot across the bow of shale and keep them back, and not keep them on the sidelines, if you like, and not give them incentive to come back to production? Would Russia support that, do you think?
It seems that most of the OPEC Plus are kind of preferring to have higher oil price now, because otherwise significant hardship will be. It can be that the decision will be the other way. But my feeling is that actually they will keep the quotas. Let's see though. It was expected that American shale producers will come back at some point. And I think that the expectation of a big competition is not very high. So let's say like this, that it's expected that they're not going to reconquer the market. But let's see what this quarter will give, because I agree with our colleagues that much depends now on demand, whether demand will finally resume, or will it keep there stagnating, or maybe even declining in case if, for example, new pandemics reinforce the lockdowns, etc. Right, so much depends on the demand, not really on producers' side. Yeah, that's quite an important point, that actually producers play a more marginal role, although we recognize that OPEC played a significant role. Yeah.
Omar, the correction that you talk about, you had said last week We have to see if it's going to be a slow one or a quick one. What is it looking now a week later? I mean, this trend line is now, 10 days or whatever, 10 trading days in a somewhat declining trend line. Does it look like it's going to be a slow correction?
Look, my preference is no. So you have you set the high at 67 and change. Let's call it 68. Let's call it 67
WTI.
On WTI, and you set a low at, let's call it 57.25, I think. And then you tested that low one time and you got to 57.44, and then market took up to the upside, up, down, up, down, up, down. So it's with corrections, it's extremely difficult to tell, but my preference would be for that 57.25 level on WTI to hold. My preference would be that we don't see $60 Brent again this year. That would be my preference.
I mean, OPEC rollover might give you that, right? If the OPEC rolls over this week, it sort of sets a floor there. Prices could move to the upside then.
Yeah, that's very possible as well. And I think looking at the other markets, the S&P has to also decide what it wants to do. So does Bitcoin. I think the stage is set for either continuation of this rally or more kind of sideways movement. So you've seen Bitcoin hold that $50,000 level. You've seen the S&P try to get to that, almost 4,000 point new all-time high. They're all there. The question is there the will, the oomph, the appetite, so to speak, of higher prices? And the thing that I still look at is Bitcoin. Bitcoin's trading about 55K. If it gets above 57, then I think the answer is yes, and then we all move up. If Bitcoin can't get that 57 handle, then maybe we stay around here for a while, we test those lows and see what happens.
Peter, we've seen some China geopolitical activity over the last few days, notably the agreement or the final stages of a big agreement with Iran, and also the warning that the Chinese have given to companies taking up sort of position alongside the sanctions regarding the Uyghurs. This is a continuously moving story, but clearly the Chinese are increasing their posture rather than retreating.
Absolutely, Sean. We're even hearing that very much so in Australia. They've got a fairly aggressive stance on it, as in from a humanitarian side. So that's the lens that I'm looking at, because of the press here are very, very gung ho on China's behaviour and their human rights issues. And we've got many Chinese that live in Australia, and they've fled from the rule of the CCP, and not uncommon to see big bands of them protesting in the streets, or Falun Gong and all of this sort of thing, and describing with handouts and brochures organ harvesting and all of this sort of thing. So
we saw last year the Australian coal industry hit quite hard.
Absolutely.
When Australia took up a position contrary to the Chinese position on the COVID outbreak. And now we're seeing the sort of challenge or potential threat to international companies who take some political stands. Do you think that's going to be an issue to play out further?
I absolutely do, Sean. And I think that's how, that second quarter is going to be a very interesting one, because you've now got it's becoming quite a common, I think, thread weaving through where did COVID originate, the Wuhan lab, all of those sort of things are now coming into mainstream, that people aren't taking backward steps and there's a sense of, I don't know. It's now very much across the media that, yes, that was that's what it was responsible, and that's how it happened. And is there any recompense, or how does the world move forward from this?
And Myanmar, of course, over the weekend was a really bloody affair of sort of street demonstrations getting shot down by the government or the military leadership there.
Yes.
How is that story playing out in Asia? I mean, you would imagine the Chinese are giving the Myanmar military leadership cover to suppress this uprising.
Well, we're hearing that as far as, the Rohingyas and all of this. So you're getting a lot of coverage in the press. There's talk that Soros's money that was supporting some angle has been not necessarily confiscated, but it's been restricted. So you're hearing all of this different news, Sean, that's, it's so hard to comment from where we are in Sydney because it's a long way north. But there's, again, a hell of a lot of confusion and uncertainty and who's who in the zoo sort of thing. So, yes, it's creating...
Well, it's certainly one of those lines as to where you stand on Myanmar, where you stand on the Uyghurs. As we talked a lot last year about the emergence of a new line, where do you stand either side of that line as time goes on will start to determine where your economic opportunities may be. And that's something that one has to keep an eye on. Let's go to the survey question before we go around for a final comment today. What do you expect OPEC to do this week? Roll over to support prices or raise supply to scare off shale? I suppose if you were thinking OPEC might surprise us again, you might vote a certain way. But if you don't think they're going to surprise us again, you might also look at this from another angle. The outlook for that might be other. Omar, Monday, again, the outlook for the week ahead. What do you think? Where does this market go? Obviously, the OPEC meeting stands out as the big moment on Thursday. Do things go sideways until then?
I think basically, nothing is, there's no real clarity. Suez might be finished or might not, and OPEC might do this or might not. I find it very interesting that the US and Europe all of a sudden love Chinese Muslims, while bombing, other Muslims for, over a decade. But that's got nothing to do with, them wanting to pressure China. Of course, it's, real belief in, democracy and all that kind of stuff. But no, I mean, on a serious level, I think sideways, and the market really has to decide. I'm also kind of undecided, but I do favor a shorter consolidation phase before we move higher. Let's see what OPEC does. I think they need the money. I think they're also feeling the pressure of all this green talk and energy and all the rest of it. And they want the money while the going is good. And I'm fascinated to see when shale finally do come back. It's like looking for a unicorn, basically. Like, anytime now, here we go. They're gearing up. Here they're coming now. Anytime. So let's see.
They certainly seem to be getting ready to pop. I suppose where does the oil price sustain? But those 8 million barrels of idle supply sitting on the sidelines, I suppose, remains a deterrence. And Dr. Andrei, your thoughts for where Russia might go into this meeting with OPEC. They have in the past seemed more comfortable with increasing supply and taking a slightly lower price. They're the ones that have benefited in the last two meetings, with the exceptions they received with Kazakhstan to keep increasing supply. Would you expect them to seek more of that exception?
Well, I would say that main stakeholders are would favor the maintaining the quotas. And then actually it occurred to me that your questionnaire should have three questions. One is on whether OPEC will soften down the quotas. Another on whether they're going to keep it, and third one they're going to tighten it. And I would say that the second option, the middle option, is the most likely. And of course, I mean, there is a need to maintain the price. I repeatedly argued that Russia's strong position during the low price episodes is often exaggerated because Russian Urals, the brand that Russia sells, the Urals, is not very competitive during the low prices because refineries start to buy Arabian light. That's what we observed in April last year. And I remember this declaration, but by Lukoil, the main oil company, private company in Russia, who said continuous low price going to be catastrophe. That were his words. And that basically kind of like gives a hint to the fact that no, actually keeping the quota is the best.
Well, certainly keeping, it seems to me, the Russian relationship with the Gulf OPEC countries has now become a real geopolitical asset for Moscow that they won't want to be giving up, I would suspect. Let's get the survey result before we give Peter the last word today. Rollover to support prices remains the kind of overwhelming view in our room, and I think most other rooms. The question is, does it remain the overwhelming view in Riyadh? Peter, your outlook for the markets this week. We did see, obviously, the Dow Jones, S&P finish out last week quite strongly. Dow Jones now well above 33,000. It just seems this trend line just keeps on going and going, even though there's moments of little dips down, but it's the trend line is very solid.
Absolutely, Sean. I mean, you're looking at that uptick there. Is 35,000 achievable in the next quarter? It just seems to be, beyond comprehension. Got through 30,000 and then it just galloped. I thought 30,000 might be the headline, and 30,000's long gone. So
10%
maybe it's
ago.
Exactly. So maybe it's going to be, and you see those moves, 3 and 4% over a matter of a couple of weeks to the upside. So it just seems to be that momentum building. Never stand in the way of market sentiment. I think it's going to be wild and woolly, but I think it's just trending up from here. There's no thought. I mean, I've even got the binoculars out, Sean, and I'm looking for inflation. They tell me there's none out there, but maybe there is something somewhere. I know asset prices in Sydney, the prices of houses are through the roof, and this is what they're telling me pretty much across a lot of the world.
Yeah, well, the property seems to be the big winner in recent months. I think perhaps people getting out of the equity markets a little bit and finding other homes.
Well, could well be. So this week I'm looking at US dollar, is it through the 93? I'm looking at the equity market if it continues. I've got the non-farm payrolls on Friday. Is 500,000 that headline? Are we working towards that? Unemployment numbers running from 6.3, maybe even touch 6%. So things are starting to look relatively okay, and Biden coming out, Sean, and saying he wants to spend $3 trillion on infrastructure. It certainly needs it, the state. So that would be the biggest shot in the arm that anyone could ask for. So,
well, I suppose it's always important to see where the bottom of the K is, right? This K recovery. All the policies on the lower half of the K, and you might get distracted and dizzy by the upper half of the K, but where the policy is being made and the stimulus is being made and the interest rates and so forth is the bottom half of the K, and that clearly is in great stress. But as Omar always reminds us, keep an eye on the appetite for Bitcoin. As long as Bitcoin's up in the $50,000 range and moving, you'd have to say it's risk on across all markets, and that seems to be, Bitcoin is held quite firmly in the 50s and little corrections, but seems risk on sentiment is quite solid in that area. Well, let's wrap it up there. Let Omar get on with tutoring his little mentee, and hopefully they'll have a bit of fun. Andrei, thank you so much. Peter, as always, great to have your insights. Omar, as always, thank you. Have a great week. We'll catch up with you in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.